Ever looked at a life built meticulously over years and realized you're a stranger in your own home, a ghost in your own marriage? Welcome to Hidden Love Stories. Before we unravel a story that tears through the facade of suburban tranquility, if you connect with tales of hidden desires and complex hearts, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. And if this story resonates, a like would mean the world. Now let's step into a life on the edge. 17 years. I'd been married to Mark for 17 years. That number once felt like a triumph, a banner waving over a conquered peak. Now, it hangs more like a sentence, each day a tally mark. He's a decent man, you know? Reliable, quiet, devastatingly predictable. The kind of man who never missed a mortgage payment, who'd get the oil in my car changed before the dashboard light even flickered on. But somewhere in that comfortable rhythm, he stopped seeing me. Oh, he saw me physically. A good morning over coffee, shared dinners, sometimes even a TV show watched side by side in a silence so thick it was suffocating. But the woman inside, the Sarah with dreams still flickering and fears that gnawed, the one desperate to feel a spark, any spark. He stopped seeing her long ago. Our existence had melted into a relentless monotony, a slow drain I hadn't even registered until I felt almost empty. This is normal, I'd tell myself. This is what long-term marriage becomes. The narrative was that passion fades, replaced by partnership, shared bills, routine, a comforting stability. And I tried. I really did, to be grateful for the roof over our heads, our healthy kids, a husband who never, ever raised his voice. But what happens when that comfort starts to feel like a beautifully furnished cage, devoid of any warmth, any fire? We lived on a quiet cul-de-sac in a town that could have been any town, USA. Perfectly manicured lawns, neighbors who offered a friendly wave but never truly pried. 4th of July block parties where at least 3 families brought the exact same pasta salad. Across the street were the Coles, Robert and Diane, and their 2 children. Their oldest, Ethan, had ventured off to college a few years back and had recently returned, degree in hand. He was 23, adrift in that post-graduation limbo, figuring out his next move while staying with his parents. I remembered him as a kid, all daredevil energy on his skateboard, challenging his friends to go faster, to be bolder. Now he was transformed, tall, remarkably composed, with a polite demeanor that charmed everyone. The first real conversation I had with Ethan, the adult Ethan, was on a mundane Tuesday afternoon. I was wrestling with weeds in the front flower bed, a losing battle, when he ambled over and offered to help. I chuckled, assuring him I had it handled, but he gently insisted. We talked about the neighborhood, the odd sensation of returning home after years away, a place so familiar, yet somehow alien. He confessed to feeling stuck, that suffocating uncertainty about the future pressing down on him. I found myself nodding, and then the words tumbled out before I could stop them, a small, raw admission I hadn't voiced to anyone. I feel stuck too. That tiny confession, it was like a key turning in a long rusted lock. In the weeks that followed, our conversations became more frequent, more natural. He'd appear when I was watering the petunias or walking Rusty, our aging golden retriever. Sometimes he'd bring over an extra coffee, claiming he'd brewed too much. Our talks were easy, unfiltered, a space where I didn't have to pretend. He asked questions. He genuinely listened. He didn't look at me like Mark did, as if I were a permanent, unremarkable fixture in the house. Ethan looked at me like I mattered, like I was someone worth seeing. I hadn't felt that gaze in what felt like a lifetime. I swear, I didn't plan any of this. I wasn't hunting for an escape, not consciously. It just unfolded, slowly, almost imperceptibly, like water seeping through hairline cracks you never knew existed. One sticky summer evening, long after Mark had retreated to the bedroom, I found myself on the porch steps, a glass of chilled Chardonnay in hand. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, vast and silent. Ethan was out too, leaning against his family's mailbox across the street. He saw me, and without a word, he crossed over and sat beside me on the steps. We just sat there for a long time, enveloped in the night's embrace. No words exchanged. It should have been awkward, that silence between a 40-something woman and a 23-year-old man. It wasn't. Eventually, breaking the quiet, I asked him what he was most afraid of. He mulled it over, his brow furrowed. "Waking up 10 years from now," he finally said, his voice low, "and realizing I've lived someone else's life, not my own." My breath hitched. That sentiment, it struck a chord so deep within me because I realized with a sickening lurch that I'd already done exactly that. That night was a turning point. Our conversations afterward grew longer. The silences between us more charged, more potent. He never made a move, not even a hint of one. Neither did I. But an undeniable energy crackled between us, an unspoken awareness that was both thrilling and terrifying. "It's innocent," I'd whisper to myself. "I'm just enjoying the company, the feeling of being seen." But a deeper, more honest part of me knew I was drifting, untethered, into dangerous waters. I started inventing reasons to interact with him, baking too many cookies, needing help with some trivial yard task. Nothing overt, nothing that would raise eyebrows, but the shift was palpable, at least to me. Mark noticed. Though he never voiced it directly, his questions became more frequent. "Where were you? What were you up to?" His tone wasn't accusatory, more inquisitive, perhaps tinged with a nascent suspicion. I found myself fabricating small lies, and the self-loathing that followed was intense. Not because I felt overtly guilty, I hadn't done anything, not yet, but because I recoiled from examining why I was lying in the first place. This dance on the edge of what's forbidden, how many of us have been there? If these hidden stories speak to you, a quick like or a comment sharing your thoughts helps others find our community. Let's continue Sarah's journey. I tried to pull back to regain control. I'd avoid going outside if I sensed Ethan was around. I let his texts sit unanswered for hours. I threw myself into chores with a renewed, almost manic fervor. Spent more time with Mark, trying to force a connection that felt increasingly artificial. But it all felt like a performance, like I was an actress playing a role I no longer understood, trying desperately to convince myself I could still fit into a life that had shrunk around me. Then, a casual encounter shifted everything once more. I ran into Diane, Ethan's mother, at the local supermarket. We exchanged pleasantries, the usual small talk about weather and town gossip. Then, as we were about to part ways, she smiled warmly and said, "Ethan mentioned you've been such a good friend to him lately. He says you're one of the few people who makes him feel grounded right now." Friend. The word, meant kindly, struck me with a peculiar pang. It should have been reassuring, a validation of my attempts to keep things appropriate. It wasn't. Instead, it illuminated with stark clarity how deeply intertwined our lives had become, and how far I had strayed from the woman I thought I was, the woman I was supposed to be. That night, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. More gray hairs than I remembered, my face softer, etched with the years of routine and responsibility. But my eyes, they held a spark, a troubled yet undeniably alive glimmer I hadn't seen in years, and that terrified me more than anything. What was I doing? He was 23, a boy I'd watched pedal his bike down our street. I was a married woman, a mother with responsibilities, a reputation, yet none of these cold, hard facts could extinguish the burgeoning feeling in my chest. It wasn't simple lust, nor was it some reckless act of rebellion. It felt deeper, more profound, like being truly, wholly seen for the first time in an eternity. I started journaling, pouring out my tangled thoughts onto the page, trying to make sense of the emotional whirlwind. "It's just a phase," I'd write, "a reaction to loneliness, a classic midlife crisis symptom." But every time his name appeared in my handwriting, my conviction wavered. I knew I was teetering on the edge of a line I couldn't uncross. I didn't know if I would cross it, but the proximity was intoxicatingly dangerous. Then came the moment that shattered all pretense. One afternoon, while rearranging books in the living room, the doorbell chimed. It was Ethan. He'd come to return a casserole dish I'd left at their house after a neighborhood potluck. I took it, murmured my thanks, and started to close the door, but he didn't move. He just looked at me, his gaze not filled with desire, but with a raw, aching vulnerability that mirrored my own. "I don't know if I should say this, Sarah," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "but you're the only person who really sees me right now. And I don't want that to go away." My heart hammered against my ribs. Every rational thought screamed at me to step back, to create distance. But instead, I found myself opening the door wider, letting him in. We ended up on the couch, a mere breath separating us. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. The silence thrummed with everything left unsaid, a language more potent than any words. I looked at him, truly looked, and for a fleeting second, I saw myself reflected in his lost, searching eyes, both of us craving connection, understanding, and so was I. Nothing physical happened that day. Yet, an unspoken understanding, a profound acknowledgement passed between us. I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I couldn't keep pretending this was nothing. I had reached the precipice, and whatever came next would irrevocably change everything. After that charged afternoon, an invisible line had been crossed, not in action, but in spirit, and the spirit is so much harder to conceal. The days that followed were thick with a subtle, unspoken tension. I found myself scrutinizing Mark for any sign that he sensed the shift, but he seemed oblivious, or perhaps willfully ignorant. That was Mark's way. If it wasn't explicitly stated, it didn't exist. I threw myself into routines, hoping to outrun the feelings, even joined a book club, but nothing could fill the space Ethan had unknowingly carved open inside me. It was like discovering a hidden room in a house you thought you knew intimately. Once seen, it couldn't be unseen. Ethan, too, was careful, our few exchanges heavy with unspoken emotion. I tried to convince myself that as long as we didn't act on it, no real wrong was being done, but my heart had already defected. One evening, Mark looked up from dinner. "You seem different lately, Sarah," he said, his gaze steady. "Everything okay?" My smile was too quick, too bright. "Of course, just a lot on my mind," he nodded slowly. "You've been quieter, distant." "I don't mean to be," I replied, and it was true. But bridging the chasm that had opened between us felt impossible without confessing the full extent of my emotional wandering. That night, lying beside Mark's peaceful, sleeping form, I felt like a phantom in my own marriage. The next day, Ethan texted, "Coffee later?" I stared at the two words for a long time before replying, "Sure." We met at a quiet park cafe, public enough to feel safe, private enough for honesty. The tension was a palpable thing between us. "I've been thinking," Ethan began, "maybe I should go away for a bit, get some space." My heart plummeted. "Why?" He looked down. "Because this, whatever this is, it's starting to hurt, and I don't want to hurt you, Sarah." Or myself. Tears pricked my eyes. "You haven't hurt me." "Haven't I?" he asked gently. I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. I wanted to beg him to stay, to tell him how his presence had reawakened a part of me I thought long dead, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded. Maybe space would be good. We both understood what remained unsaid. Something real and beautiful had bloomed, but at the wrong time, in the wrong way. Ethan left 2 days later. I watched him drive away from my window, a piece of my soul going with him. The following weeks were a blur of distractions, trying to re-engage with Mark, all while hiding a profound grief. Ethan's absence was a constant, aching void. About 6 weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived, postmarked from Oregon. No return address, but I knew his script instantly. He wrote that he was okay, missed our talks, hoped I was well. And at the bottom, "Some people come into our lives to wake us up. Doesn't mean we get to keep them." I read it over and over, then tucked it away. I never replied. Time passed. Life found its rhythm, but I was no longer the same. One evening, Mark said, "You've come back to me lately, Sarah. I don't know where you went for a while, but I'm glad you're back." I smiled, a bittersweet recognition. He had no idea how much of me had been missing in the first place. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild, not to forget Ethan, but to understand what his presence had revealed. I had allowed myself to become invisible, neglecting my own needs for the sake of stability. I still had depth, desire, a desperate need to be truly seen. I never told Mark about Ethan, not because I was protecting him, but because the story wasn't truly about betrayal. It was about a painful, necessary awakening. I hoped Ethan found happiness, someone less complicated. But a part of me would always carry his presence, a quiet flame, a reminder of what it felt like to be fully seen. A full year passed. I was at the downtown farmers market when I heard my name. "Sarah?" I turned and there he was. Ethan. He looked older, changed by life, a new depth in his eyes. When he smiled, my knees nearly buckled, not from romantic longing, but from the sheer force of memory and emotion. We hugged, a brief, gentle embrace heavy with unspoken history. He was in town for a few days, a surprise visit to his parents. "You look good," he said softly. "Happy?" "I'm better than I was," I admitted. "How about you?" "Figuring it out," he replied. Still. We sat on a bench, the market bustle fading. Small talk at first, then that familiar, meaningful quiet. "I never wrote back to your letter," I said. He smiled with understanding. "I didn't expect you to." "I wanted to," I confessed. "Some things are better left where they belong," he nodded. In that moment, there was peace. I had weathered the storm, scarred but clearer, stronger. "I don't regret it," I said, meaning any of it. "Me neither," he replied. "You taught me more than you know." Our second hug goodbye was longer, unhurried. As he walked away, there was no hollow ache, only gratitude. Ethan had been a mirror, a wake-up call, forcing me to confront whether the life I was living was the life I still wanted. Mark came home the next day. "I missed you," he said. "I missed you too," I replied, and for the first time in what felt like an age, I meant it without reservation. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I was more present, more aware of myself and of him. I had started tending to my own soul. We began rebuilding with small things: Friday dinners out, evening walks. Slowly, we rediscovered each other. One evening, watching an old movie, Mark took my hand. "I know I'm not always the most expressive man, Sarah, but I want you to know I see you. I really do." Tears welled. "I see you too," I whispered. Because I did. I saw the woman I was, the woman I had become, and the one I was still growing into, and I respected them all. Ethan would always be a significant, fleeting chapter that reminded me of my humanity, the complexity of love, and how sometimes being seen by the wrong person at the right moment can save you. But that chapter was definitively closed. My story was here, now, in this home, with Mark, in this life I had chosen anew, not from duty, but from conscious, deliberate choice. I still have that letter, a reminder that love takes many forms, and not all are meant to last. Some are simply meant to teach. Did Sarah cheat? Her heart certainly wandered, her emotions stirred by a connection that made her feel alive. But perhaps the real question isn't about a line crossed, but what she did after seeing that line so clearly. She came back. She worked harder, she looked inward, and she chose to grow rather than merely escape. Love, in its truest form, isn't perfection. It's a continuous, conscious decision made every single day with eyes wide open. What are your thoughts on Sarah's journey and the choices she made? Share your reflections in the comments below. If this story touched you, please subscribe to Hidden Love Stories and like this video for more true tales of the heart's hidden paths. We appreciate your support more than words can say.